and welcome to MCTV's Let's Talk. I'm Mike Stanzillas, Vice President of Membership and Government Affairs for the Morris County Chamber of Commerce. And today we are very fortunate to have James O'Hearn of Authentic Leadership as our guest on Member Spotlight. So Jim O'Hearn spent a career in leadership and executive development, gaining experience at Marriott International, where he became Vice President of Worldwide Learning Resources, at Honeywell, where he directed executive leadership development, and at Hess Corporation in a similar global role. Now in his own practice, Jim engages leadership to develop high-quality performing teams to build culture, tightly aligned with strategy, and buttressed by cross-functional team synergy and collaboration. So Jim, your background really tells a lot. You've worked for three amazing leaders here, American, almost legendary status, Bill Marriott, Larry Bossidy, and John Hess. So with your background, tell us how your experience shapes your current view of leadership today.
Hey, Mike. Well, thank you. Thanks so much. And this is a wonderful service on the part of the Chamber to get to know us better, give us a chance to get to know others better. And thanks so much for that. As you mentioned, my career has been primarily focused on leadership development, a small segment of human resources. And given all of what we're going through today with a recommitment to companies' community responsibility and social responsibility, to helping employees as they're going through the challenges of a COVID environment. What's interesting is that some of what's working well today has been working well for business for a number of years. And I'm fascinated to look back and see how some of these principles that I grew up on are still playing out very effectively for business today. So for instance, going back to my earlier career at Marriott, I spent 12 years in the organization, eventually ran learning for the organization. And interestingly, going all the way back to Mr. Marriott and his dad, Jay Willard, they had a philosophy that the only way you're going to win, and particularly in the hospitality business, but almost in any business, is to take care of your people. The more you focus, their mantra was, if we take care of our associates, they'll take care of our guests. And guess what? They won. They have recently become the largest hotel company in the world with currently, 750,000 people around the world wearing the Marriott name tag. They also had a real focus on brand standards. The difference between a Residence Inn and a Fairfield Inn and a Ritz-Carlton is clear as a bell. And operating procedures are at the core of the Marriott operation. And then lastly, and interestingly, they focus very much on management development. You might be a really good restaurant manager and in the pocket to be a food and beverage director at some point in your career. They wanted to help you do that and to be successful. And the retention that they have of staff at Marriott is unlike any other hotel company in the business. Very unique and very different. Now we could contrast that a little bit, Mike, if you want. I then came up here to New Jersey and ended up at the Larry Bossidy Learning Center running executive and leadership development there. And it was a different shop. It had some of the same principles. They were guided by the boss, Larry Bossidy, who, and interestingly, all of these guys were, Jim Collins would, in Good to Great, would talk about humility. Bossidy was a really tough guy to work for. But at the end of the day, Larry was kind of a humble guy. And he really focused on process excellence. He wasn't going to make it in aerospace and a multi-industry technology company unless they were really good at process excellence. And he wrote the book Execution with Ram Charan. It really focused on the alignment between strategy. When you finish your strategy in the summer months and you're starting to lay out your budget for next year to meet that strategy, he brought to the table the human capital management plan and making sure that business was really committed to succession planning and talent management. And they did it really well. So Bossidy's mantra was process excellence, and alignment was really going to drive consistent results.
Yeah. So just for our listeners, Larry Bossidy came up through GE, but then he was the CEO of Honeywell, and that's the period that Jim is referring to right now. So yeah, it's amazing what you're talking about with you know, Larry Bossidy, Bill Marriott. I can't wait to hear about your next career or your next company that you work for, and of course, I'll let you take John Hess as well.
Yeah, I actually spent a lot more time with Dave Cote as CEO at Honeywell than Larry. But
Okay.
Larry set he set the standards.
Sure.
He built the framework. I then, after 7 or 8 years, went downtown into downtown New York. John Hess with an interesting. It was a downstream oil business, which was not very popular in the oil business. On 1,200 retail stores, and interestingly, the most sold toy in the world with the Hess truck. At one time, it was selling more than the Barbie doll. An amazing little fixture, but at the end of the day, a downstream oil business. It wasn't going to go very far. John Hess had to build an upstream business, which he built in Houston, and then he had to integrate the two, and finding synergies upstream and downstream, where and in the middle of this, natural gas really came into play, but he used and we used leadership workshops, leadership development. And Honeywell did the same thing. A seat at the table with leaders from different businesses to work on enterprise-related problems, built synergies within the business, across functions, and paid off greatly for the conglomerate at large, for the business at large. So I feel really lucky to have had the chance to work with really good organizations that had really an impact. Hess, by the way, a very successful now energy player, no longer just oil and gas, big energy provider. But interestingly, maybe in common, Mike, first and foremost, these are leaders that had quite an element of humility in the way they ran the business. They were enormously customer focused, and maybe in Bill Marriott's case, a little bit more community focused, very focused on the community, as well as process excellence and building really good operating standards for the business.
Wow, so you really laid a lot out there for us to unpack. So let's talk directly to our members here, right? So you've worked for, you outlined 3 really different companies, 3 really different leadership styles. Let's get into this a little bit with, you mentioned, sort of the emotional EQ of it, the humility, right? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about vulnerability. Let's talk about, those different leadership qualities that I think you have a lot to teach us about with our members here. So let's start with, I guess, humility and vulnerability. What do you do with your customers to teach them that, to demonstrate that? How can you impart that upon them?
Great question, big question for the few minutes we have today. But I would say that successful work, a successful workplace, really revolves around the relationship between the boss and the associates. And if we use one of the core principles of leadership of the 21st century, emotional intelligence, that is all about the manager being clear about his or her strengths, weaknesses, limitations, quirks, and self-awareness being a key component of that. Once you're aware of those things, then to what extent are you managing those? If you know that you have a tendency to fly off the handle when X is going to happen, how well are you managing that? And then we can move into social relationship management, but all of this kind of grounded in empathy, an ability to listen to somebody else's perspective, particularly when it might be counter to yours, to be open to other multiple perspectives, to try and, as an orchestra leader would do, manage the symphony and the gifts that each department and it brings to the party. I mean, these are some of the core elements. We need a lot, you know, a day for a decent leadership workshop. But I think the core component, Mike, is with a clarity of purpose. What business are we in? And the three gentlemen I just mentioned knew very clearly and stuck very clearly to their purpose and the business that they were in. And then with that, how clear is our mission and the values that we want to use to run this business? How clear is that to my team, to the leadership team, but more importantly, how clear is that to 1,000 people working in this hotel? And I can tell you stories of the amount of time we spent with customers speaking to everybody in a hotel around what they needed out of that hotel in order for them to be successful when they were in at the New York Marquis. That clarity of purpose, of communication, of engaging the staff, and then when you do that, when you include the staff in strategy and planning and execution, it's very motivating. That's driving attraction for people that aren't with you yet, for your talent acquisition. That's driving development of people, and they're gaining perspective and experience, and they're getting ready for a higher level position. And it's really driving retention of people. You keep your people, you're going to be that much more competitive. These are some of the core principles that have guided my work and continue to guide my current practice, Mike.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about your current practice right now. Here we are, 2020, middle of a pandemic. What are you doing now that you may have been doing differently? Or you'd start out with something very interesting, and that the basic core of leadership is the same as when you first started to what it is now. How do you bring that back in? Like, now what? Now what are you doing here in 2020?
What I'm doing, you know, might matter. What our chamber members and business leaders are doing is what counts. And I'm seeing people more empathetic to employees and what employees are going through in a workforce that's driven in a COVID environment. If you don't have that sensitivity to what a mom is going through or dad is going through in a one-bedroom apartment with a new baby, and both folks working in the home, it's a tough environment. And I'm hearing a lot of business leaders really committed to providing the support they need to provide to people in our current environment. I think that empathy is at an all-time high and needs to be. Sensitivity, and along the way with things that are going on in the community, I think companies are trying to get clear around their role in social responsibility, their role in community relations. And as that's being redefined, and as you include your leadership team and your employees in defining the role that you should be playing, that's driving engagement of the workforce, and it's developing leadership skill in your management team. And that's the kind of stuff that I facilitate and help businesses find, agree on collectively, build synergy around, and ultimately use to drive their results.
Wow. So, it is about results, but it's really about the journey to those results, right? If you're demonstrating and behaving, modeling those behaviors that you talked about, and you mentioned humility, empathy, right? Those are two amazing features to have in a leader. I want to go back to something you mentioned a little earlier, and we'll wrap it up with this. But you talked about listening. Leaders need to be able to listen, right? And listen to a diverse group of people and a diverse viewpoints. And this has to do with the greater view of society at large now, not just leadership here in our corporations, but leadership in our political and government lives, right? So the word compromise was such an important word. You had Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were always able to compromise, right? Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich were always able to compromise and find that middle ground, even though they came from opposite corners. What is your thoughts on leaders and do they compromise? Are they showing vulnerability with that? Tell our audience a little bit about your experience with compromise.
I would say, Mike, even before we get to compromise, there has to be a commitment to the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of politicians, one of the guys I grew up with, Terry McAuliffe, went on to become governor of Virginia. And one of Terry's, when he started, he put the word out that the State House is open from 5 to 7 every night. Please come by if you're working in the state legislature. Please come by and have a drink if you'd like. The booze is on me. And what he was trying to do, same with Reagan and Tip O'Neill and all of them. A good leader is first and foremost committing himself or herself to the relationship with, at times, adversaries. We can go back all the way back to Abe Lincoln and Doris Kearns Goodwin and her wonderful book on leadership in turbulent times. And we see, Lincoln, actually a different book on his teams, but selecting people who had very different perspectives than his own. That takes not only emotional intelligence, but courage, takes guts, it takes resolve, and in today's environment, good leaders have to be ready to make that kind of investment, that kind of personal investment in the organization, in working across party lines and across boundaries, and building synergies and facilitating input from across the organization in order to really, the organization and the community. And when you do that effectively, you're going to get a hell of a lot better result than when you try and do it without that.
Absolutely. I love what you had to say, courage, guts, resolve. To have the guts and the confidence, the self-confidence to take in opposing views and develop relationships with people. So, to our members out there watching today's program, I highly recommend that you start a relationship with Jim O'Hearn of Authentic Leadership, because he's got the guts, the courage, and the resolve to work with you and help you grow your business and develop your leaders, or you as a leader yourself. So Jim, thank you so much for being here today.
Mike, really a pleasure. Thank you. Really nice to work with the Chamber. Is such a fabulous resource around the county. And thanks for doing this. And if I have an opportunity to work more with any of our members, I'm here to help in any way I can.
Great. Once again, Jim O'Hearn, Authentic Leadership, thank you. And thank you to all of our Chamber members for all of your support, courage, guts, resolve. We'll leave you with that. Thank you so much.